Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. Today we have author Aaron Starmer. He is a young adult and middle grade author. Did I cover all the points there?
Yeah, I mean range within there too, younger middle grade, older, it all leaks into each other. So, yeah.
Fun. Well, thank you for being here again. Your newest upcoming release is Night Swimming. It's a young adult book. I forgot the character's main name, but jump in and tell us about the characters, the premise of the book, what we'll find.
Sure. Well, the main character is a 18-year-old named Trevor, and the other main character is named Sarah, and they both have just graduated from high school, and this is set in 1994 in the weeks after graduation. And the two characters are friends, but Trevor wants a bit more out of the friendship, and you have to question whether Sarah does. But Sarah presents a little adventure for the two of them, and that is to sneak into all the swimming pools in the small town that they live in at night and see if they can swim in all the pools before they leave for college in the fall. So that's the hook, that's the setup. But something happens at about a third of the way through the book when they come upon a unique pool, and they're joined by some friends. And I think with the theme of the name of this podcast, it's something a little magical. A lot of my books have, a realistic setup and then a magical turn, and this one especially does.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask that if a lot of your books had magical elements to them.
Yeah, I mean, most of them do, and when people ask me what genre I write, it's sometimes hard for me to say beyond that. Is, I like to write, I wouldn't call it magical realism because that's sort of tied up with a very specific genre, but it's, realistic stories that a magical element gets introduced and the characters have to deal with it. And usually they deal with it in a somewhat realistic way, but sometimes the magic sort of overtakes and sweeps everyone into it, and that's a case in this book.
Neat. Yeah, it was interesting when I saw it on the book on Goodreads. It said historical fiction, and I was like, wait, historical in 1994? Yeah. But I guess so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I missed my 30th high school reunion this last summer, but it is 30 years, and when I was writing it, it's hard to fathom that sometimes. But then I look back to 1994; it's the equivalent of reading a book set in 1964. So.
Right. Yeah. And my sister graduated from high school in 1994, so I was like, yeah. Okay, well, I can put myself back there. That's
yeah.
A lot of fun. So how did you come up with the idea for this book?
Well, I don't want to say that, I came up with the idea in 1994, but I sort of, it's not based on something that I really done. I didn't swim in every pool in my town, but in that summer there were those sort of adventures, and the title to the song, or to the book, is Night Swimming, which is a reference to an REM song that came out during the early 90s, and something I would have been listening to during that time. And it has a very sort of nostalgic feel to it. And I just remember during that summer already being nostalgic for high school. It's sort of that quick nostalgia that you have when you're graduating, because you suddenly realize that your whole life is going to change, and you're looking back on those last 4 years, and you might have some regrets, and you might have, some things that you want to stay frozen in time with. So I was trying to recapture those feelings, for a young audience that that might be going through something very similar, but also people my age that, want to revisit that time. So, it is a nostalgic book in that, as you said, it's, historical fiction, but it's also a book about nostalgia, and about how nostalgia interacts with our life at different times.
And why did you choose? I mean, I think looking at your book, well, we already said that you write those middle grade young adult books. Why did you choose this age range?
You know, Typically when I write books, I'm very interested in the sort of points in life where there's stark changes. So when I write about high schoolers, I usually write about seniors, because, at least for me, that was the most transformative year of my teenage years, because you're facing all these new things. When I write middle grade novels, I'm typically writing about 12 or 13-year olds, because that is a very transitional point. And it's just the time that I remember most clearly and most emotionally. But I also just find it interesting to tell stories about, because we're all looking for stories where children or characters are facing change in their life, and those are the sort of two distinct moments from adolescence that I remember.
And are you a lifelong author, or how did you get into writing?
When I was young, I always wrote. I always wanted to be a writer in some form. Went to college, studied English and writing, and did that path, but then, had to get a job. I wasn't getting a book deal at 22 years old. So I ended up working, some office jobs in New York that were in the travel industry. And I worked in the travel industry for a number of years. But it was jobs that were also associated with writing and books. And then I sort of got into travel writing at the same time. And at a certain point, I was writing novels that weren't being published, novels for adults. Agents weren't interested in them. They weren't particularly good. But the one thing that I noticed is I was most excited about writing young characters, and I thought that's where I had perhaps had the most talent. So I decided to write a middle grade novel, and I really didn't know all that much about that world. But I had a friend who worked at Scholastic, and she just gave me some pointers and told me how to put together a pitch package. And she didn't send me to any editors or anything, but she told me what you needed to do, to get a book published. And that was back in like 2007, so a long time ago now. And it was a different world of publishing. It was sort of a boom time, and I was lucky to get in then, and have been in ever since.
That's exciting. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that you could just pitch to Scholastic directly.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't pitch to Scholastic. I got an agent. It
Okay.
was more about, she gave me she said, if you want to get a book published, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to
Okay.
have to, you'll have to have your manuscript, and you'll have to have, comp titles that you can compare to. And this is how you write a query letter to an agent. And,
Okay.
and it's sort of advice that I still give young writers. It's changed, but, a lot of it is about being very specific in who you seek out, to help you. Like, there's a lot of people going wide with their queries and their pitches. When you have to do your research and figure out, where does this book fit in this world, and who in that world is the right person for this book, whether that's an agent or an editor or a publisher. So I learned a lot during that time, and I'm still trying to figure some of that stuff out.
Fun. And I noticed you have a couple of different books, the Riverman trilogy. Can you tell me about that series?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, um, that is a series about, it's sort of, some people call it middle grade, some people call it YA. It's about a character that, it's set during the late 1980s, and a young 12-year-old boy who's approached by his neighbor, who tells him, that she wants him to write her biography. And it seems like a very strange request, of course. But then he finds out that, she says that she visits a magical world, and and that there's a creature there named the Riverman who's stealing the souls of children that visit this magical world, and uh, and she wants to get her biography down before she's gone. Now, of course, this is all done in, like I said, in a realistic scenario. So the whole book is about, does he believe that this girl is telling the truth, or is she covering up something else? Um, and it's about that very specific moment in time when you're a child and you're juggling these ideas of magic and responsibility and and so for a middle grade book, it's rather dark, but people really like that aspect of it because it's kind of spooky. But it is a trilogy, but the initial book, The Riverman, does stand alone as a book, and is often the first book of mine that people read.
Interesting. So how old is the person that's giving her biography?
She's the same. Well, she's the same age, but she's sort of like the kids from Narnia, where she says she goes to this world for years at a time. So as the story goes on, she says, well, I'm really 28 years old now, or I'm really, I spend all this time in this other world. So and that was another aspect of it is, you think of books like, these classics, the Narnia books, Alice in Wonderland. Stuff about these portal stories where children go to these magical worlds. Well, what does that do to their psyche if they're there for years and years, if they're living this whole other life? So I wanted to explore that as well.
Well, especially at that young age.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like middle grade books a lot of times explore those hard topics because you're just getting to that age where you can comprehend and you need to like process all of those, right? I mean, I can remember reading a lot of books about World War II and the Nazi Germany and the
Yeah.
Holocaust and a lot of those books and children's experiences in those times, right? I mean, the Diary of Anne Frank is so popular, and books like that just are telling you how your world works and how humanity works, I think.
Yeah, and I remember at that time you feel sometimes older than you really are. And if you look back on it, you see the silly decisions and thoughts that you might have, but when you're in it, you might feel more mature. You're also scared by a lot of things. I have a daughter who's that age right now, and I'm constantly fascinated by both her maturity and her lack of wisdom. It's that juggle, and you need that space to see it. And so the book is also about those things.
Interesting. Yeah, I always felt like I was older than I was until I was like 22, and then I was like, oh, this is really real.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I rewind a little bit now?
Yes. Well, it's that whole like 21 Jump Street thing. Like if you were a 20 something that could go back to high school, how would how would you approach it? And in certain ways you would get it all wrong, and in certain ways you'd be too smart for your own good. So
Yeah, I think I can handle staying where I am now.
yes.
So, what do you have coming next? Is night swimming, is that going to be part of a series, or do you have ideas for future characters?
No, night swimming is very sort of distinctly standalone. It's one of my shorter books, and sort of, for me, it was sort of about, let's encapsulate this one idea, this one feeling, and sort of get this quick book out of it. I do have a middle grade novel that I'm just finishing up that hopefully is going to copy edits, that will be coming out, I guess, in exactly a year. We'll see where it is on the schedule. But that's much more back in line with the Riverman and that sort of series that I talked at. It's not set as a series. Who knows? You never know if something is successful, if they'll ask for it. I've had books that I've wanted to do series on and haven't been as successful, that I haven't had the opportunity, and others that from the beginning were series. So it's the two different ways of approaching it, obviously.
And so, what do your kids think about this? I mean, do you read your books? Obviously, you read your books to most of your books to your kids. Do they like think it's cool that dad is the author?
I think at times, and then, at other times, my oldest kid has read a lot of my books. Some of them are still too mature for her. The YA ones, just because of the language and and the situations. And she's actually very good at self-regulating. It's not like she would go like she doesn't want it. She doesn't want to read stuff like that yet. But my middle grade stuff, she's been exploring a lot of it, and the younger middle grade stuff I read with her. And it's like anything. I'm still their lame dad. So as much as I think they find it fun to have an author for a dad, it's also that's secondary to other things for them.
Do you read it to them to get their critiques and their feedback?
No, but that's mainly because I don't do that with many people. My agent will give me feedback, and I've worked with a lot of the same editors, and so you have that good relationship. And there have been times where I've shared with other authors, work in progress, but it's not really anything that has ever been part of my process, because I just don't want too many voices in my head until I'm at a certain point with something, and then it's fine to get it to editors um and so on. But no, in my wife, I don't. I'll let my wife could read early draft. She doesn't choose to, but she typically doesn't even read it until it's proofread, until there's an arc out at least.
Right. Fun. So tell us a little bit more about, you talked about the theme in Night Swimming, the nostalgia and the kind of this break in between the past and what's going to happen in the future. Tell us about some other themes in your other books.
Well, it's probably my most well-known book is a book called Spontaneous, and that's a book about a high schoolers that just start to spontaneously explode, um, during high school. It's a satire and a comedy, but it's very gory. They did make a movie out of it in 2020, which was not the ideal time to have a movie coming out. But has a certain cult following, and they did it. The director and the writer director did a fantastic job with it. But it sort of encapsulates a lot of my voice, which is dark but funny, hopeful in the end, but you know explores a lot of allegory, and the particular allegory in that one is teenagers have always faced a lot of unexpected problems in their life, and whatever you want to put on that. What does the spontaneous combustion mean to these teenagers, whether it's about stress, whether it's about something else. I don't necessarily talk about what influenced me to put that in there, but it's about capturing those moments in adolescence, and that feeling. And again, that travels over to Night Swimming, so it's a very different in tone than a book like Spontaneous, which is sort of absurd and over the top, while Night Swimming is kind of subdued and is more of a vibe book, more of a hangout book, about feelings. But a lot of times what inspires me to write is, I might have a hook, whether that being, a bunch of kids try to swim in all these pools, or teenagers start exploding. But that's to get the interested readers in, and then but the writing process is really about capturing those feelings during that time.
So in Spontaneous, do you ever say why these teenagers are catching on fire? Is there a formula? Do they figure it out? How to enjoy
I
it?
mean, that's a big part of the book, and I think it's been out long enough, and the movie long enough that I can say that, you can say spoiler alert if you want to fast forward, but no, they do not. And that's sort of the point is, the most difficult things in life sometimes are hard to explain. And some people don't like that as an ending. And that is completely fair, but that is what that story is about. And I, for some reason, I feel that teenagers relate to that more than older readers. Because when you're in that, you're, as I certainly at that age was much more existential than I am now. Like I was sort of asking a lot bigger questions than I do now. Um, and so, I was trying to speak to that moment, and yeah.
I think we had time to think about that when we were
Yes.
younger. Like we just had more free time that we could let our brain roam. I think about the time I have to think about existential crisis or whatever. That's like, okay, sorry, let's move on to the next thing I really have to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And in night swimming, a big thing about it is, just sort of staying up late, listening to music and talking, these sort of things that is just part of a teenage life. But, when you look back on it, it's sort of a luxury that you have at that time, to really get introspective about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I definitely, we lived in rural South Georgia, so we did cow tipping. Those were our swimming pools.
Yes.
So, and picking up possums on the side of the road and setting them on fire. So,
it's there's all these sort of teenage rites of passage, and I don't know if the pool one is a common one, but I remember it was something that kids did. They didn't
right.
necessarily have a whole list of things, but it would I suspect it is something that kids still do. So
yeah, jump the fence. Yeah, when you're where you're not supposed to be.
Exactly.
Well, super fun. Thank you so much for being here. Tell everyone where we can find you and your book.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you can find me at my website, which is just aaronstarmer.com, AARONSTARMER. And I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram. Um, my books you can find at hopefully at your indie bookstores. I'm doing a thing where I live in Vermont, and when the book comes out, I'm going to go visit every independent bookstore in Vermont, which is much easier to do than a place like Georgia. There's about 20 of them, but I'm just going to do a little road trip. It's sort of like pool hopping through Vermont, but bookstore hopping. So hopefully, if it's not at your independent bookstore, you can ask them to order it, or some of my other books. But they're available wherever books are sold.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll have to have you back when you publish your next book.
Great. Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.